Welcome, Calvary. We're so glad that we can connect in this way. Certainly is not the same. I know if you're like me, we miss so much connecting with everybody, being able to see you, see your shining faces, being able to worship together. I trust you are able to follow that link and that we do have this hope and this focus. I got to continue in this Advent series, and we've been looking at prophet, priest, and king, and seeing those categories in the Christmas story. And just a while back, planning the series, talking with Rebecca, just thinking there's this piece that is just defies a category of just how Jesus shows up in such common ways. And while the prophet, priest, and king is true that this common, ordinary ways are there, for us in life, as we look at it, it's so easy just to miss things with the sheer busyness. And in fact, this season is almost famous for it, that there's so many more things to do. The to-do list always seems quite impressive. And if your family's like ours, it seems like no matter how hard you try to be trimming that thing down to size, it more items come on than you can do, and it just seems to grow, and it just can become the tyranny of the urgent can be overwhelming. We get so busy with so many things that we can lose focus. It's funny, they do these little tests and about perception, and if you get focusing on something, you can miss rather dramatic things that happen right in front of you. And you're like, how could you not do that? I remember there was one where they would ask you to count how many times the ball was passed between these different people, and this little person comes out in a dancing bear outfit, and it's like I missed it. I missed the dancing bear, and you're like, how could you possibly miss a full grown up in a dancing bear? And it's like I was focused on counting the number of times the ball passed. And in life, this can happen, whether it's a silly little example or everyday life, where you just miss something so important. It can be so getting wrapped up in your work that you fail to notice what's going on right in front of you. It can be sitting next to someone and not understanding. And I think this is indeed what happened with that first Christmas. So many people missed what God was doing, and the turning point of redemptive history. And for so many, they missed it. So that's the big idea I want us to focus on this morning, is that God shows up in common ways. Don't miss him. Don't miss what he is doing. So we're going to look at the same kind of format. Jesus' story, coming in common ways, our story, and then how we might apply the Word of God, and as we do, imagining what it would look like to really see this happen in our midst. So I'm going to look at a number of scriptures, but we see that Jesus came in common ways. I think in one glimpse of this, we're going to look at a number of expressions of this truth, is that Jesus's family was poor. He did not get born into a wealthy family, and there's evidences of this throughout the Christmas story. One is when he's presented, and that's recorded for us in Luke chapter 2, verses 22 to 24. And it says that, and when the time came for their purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him, Jesus, up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord, quote, every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer sacrifices according to what is said in the law of the Lord. And it says a pair of turtle doves or two young pigeons. So Mary and Joseph obeyed the law as it relates to presenting Jesus and offering sacrifice. Now, there's some nuance there in the sacrifice, in that this was not the normal sacrifice. This was a provision made for those who were extremely poor. that if you couldn't afford the normal sacrifice because you were impoverished, then you could do this. And this is, in fact, what Mary and Joseph did. So it speaks to the kind of their condition and where they're at. We understand from the Christmas story and all the surrounding narrative that really it's best to classify Jesus as growing up in a refugee situation. That'd be the categories today: displaced persons. You're like, why are people displaced today? And often it's political instability. We had a chance in my last context to work with two ethnic congregations that worshiped in the church, and both were displaced because of political violence. One was the killing fields out of Cambodia, and then the other was some ethnic cleansing that happened in Sudan, and both groups got out and end up worshiping here, and the same story around the world, that there are people who are being killed, and of course with Sudan it was because that they were Christians that they were targeted in this ethnic cleansing incident. And we see the same thing in the Holy Family and Jesus' story. They have to get up. Why? Because a political ruler is trying to kill them. And they are warned in a vision by night, and the angel is like, get up and go, and they go right away. So it was Herod's desire to kill Jesus that caused them to flee to Egypt. So Jesus has his first formative years growing up in another country because of political leaders trying to kill their family. And so this story of displaced people, which is so common today, was the context in which Jesus grew up. Even when it was time to relocate, just think how complicated the word home is for Jesus. Like where is home for Jesus? You think of heaven, of course, would be the best place that you would call home. Well, he left that for Christmas. Often we think of Christmas as a time for coming home. But for Jesus, Christmas was all about leaving home, leaving comfort, leaving privilege, leaving all those things, and coming into such a common condition. But even from an earthly perspective, where's home? He was born in Bethlehem. That's not where they were from. They had to travel there, as you of course remember, and doing so pregnant. And but even then, they need to leave. We understand from the narrative that they stayed in Bethlehem after Jesus' birth until they had to flee to Egypt. But then even coming back, they're going to come back. And then there's that last minute vision from the angel that gives them another detour. And then they had to Nazareth. So, even when you think of Jesus coming in ordinary ways, there's a lot of movement, and we see this throughout Jesus' ministry. He's an itinerant preacher. In fact, when some are coming to him, he says to them, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And that Jesus was in that sense homeless, if you will. He moved around. He was an itinerant preacher, and he came in such ordinary ways. It wasn't in a palace. Now Jesus could have easily done that. He's the Son of God, and he could have worked it out where he had a palace in Jerusalem, and then said to people, "Come to me. You can take a number and line up, and I left heaven to come into this messy, muddy world with all of its problems and all of its sorrows and difficulties. I've come far enough, and now you can come to me." But he doesn't do that, and he ends up just really without much of a home to speak of, and that's true throughout his life. You look at how God reveals this whole thing. he definitely gives preferential treatment to common people. So often the church struggles because God doesn't do things the way they do. He doesn't network. He doesn't. He doesn't reveal it to the people. Now it's true the Magi, but they were foreigners, and they came. They came following a star, which is amazing in its own way. And yet, I invite you to look afresh into this Christmas story at who does God just reveal his glory to in more splendorous ways, and that is, of course, the shepherds. And when we think of that account, that the heavens opened up before them and choirs of angels are singing, and they are drawn into angelic, glorious praise, glory to God in the highest, and they get a message straight from heaven, and these angels tell them to go. So yes, the wise men, the magi, um, did follow a star. And yet look at when God just opens up heaven and glory and splendor, it's to shepherds. It's to common, ordinary people end up seeing the unmitigated glory of God through this angelic choir. Definitely more of what God showed is given to those who are commoners. And we think of shepherds, very commonplace, not a prestigious job. And when you look into the culture, just a sense of maybe some separation, some being marginalized, maybe a sense that they weren't as trusted as others were, but not a high position, a low position. And God delights to lift up the lowly. In fact, this is indeed the very songs that come out of Mary's heart. You have given the hungry good things, and you've lifted up the lowly. This is flowing out of Elizabeth's story as well. Women not elevated in the Jewish culture are given preferential treatment in terms of how God is revealing himself. That Elizabeth is given this gift of the Holy Spirit speaking through her, and Anna, and of course Mary, song, and all of these things are recorded for us. And so God is working and revealing himself in common ways, but to common people. And if people can't believe a shepherd, then they're just going to have to not believe. But this is who God chose to be the messengers of this. And this is indeed rooted in much more ancient prophecies regarding who the Messiah was to be. Because we go back to the prophetic voice through Isaiah and the Spirit of God through him, in that mysterious partnership tells us that there'll be no stately form of majesty or anything special that will be drawn to him, but he will be common, and he will be easy to miss in that sense. That it's not as if he's going to walk around with light glowing over his head, or now certainly that glory is what's been emptied. So I think when you look at Philippians, that tells us about this emptying of that he did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he poured it out and emptied himself. That this is indeed what Isaiah is talking about, was just saying he doesn't have the stately form of majesty, that he's going to be common. Now, we get glimpses, don't we, on the Mountain of Transfiguration, where with Peter, James, and John, they're there, and Jesus is just transfigured before them. And I think we do get glimpses, too, when he interacts with demons through his ministry, that they certainly see who he is. They are not confused, are they? They instantly say, "We know who you are," or "Why have you come early, Son of Man?" And so we do get the sense that the demons actually see Jesus much more clearly. Perhaps they see what was revealed on the Mountain of Transfiguration. We're not entirely sure what their vision is. Maybe in heaven we will see that as well as they did. But we certainly know that words like "He exists" and "unapproachable light" are used, and he shines like the sun, and we get pictures of that in Revelation as well. Voice of many waters and that sort of thing. But none of that's what he emptied himself of. And that's what the prophet Isaiah is telling us, is that the Messiah, when he comes, is going to be easy to miss because he won't have any of that. He's not going to be walking around with light shining all around, and he's going to come as someone who's common and who doesn't have all of that. He comes, but we see this was all throughout Jesus' ministry, that he came to his own, and his own did not receive him. He comes to preach in his own hometown, and they are tripped up by his familiarity. They're like, we know who this is. This is Jesus. We know his mother. We know his sisters. We grew up this. We know Jesus. Why is he preaching like this? And they took offense at him. The offense was because of his accessibility. The offense was he didn't come the way they decided he ought to come. And this is, in fact, one of the central lines through this whole inquiry is that we have expectations. We expect God to do things certain ways. And we're going to dig a little deeper into that. And that is so part of this Christmas story. There are so many people who miss the Messiah because he came in a way they didn't expect. And God was at work, and the turning point of redemptive history, 400 years of silence, is shattered, and God himself coming in the flesh, and choirs of angels, and the only ones that he's revealing that to are those whom we would not choose. I think we can see some notable exception. Who isn't involved in the story is probably all the people that church folk would want to get involved. Let's get politically powerful people. Let's get people that have high rank and who are networked and who can get the word out. They don't get any of that. The closest you even get to anything is when there's some scribes brought in by Herod to figure out where the Messiah is going to be born. They get a second or two of airtime. And it's like a little cameo. They're on the camera, and then as soon as they say that he's going to be born in Bethlehem, then they're out. They're stage left, and that's it. Nothing of the high priest, nothing of the Sanhedrin and the power brokers. And Herod's only in there because he's trying to kill Jesus. But God is not revealing these things to him. He didn't get angelic visitation or choirs of angels. No, the shepherds did. And so it's notable, isn't it, that the rich, the powerful, the connected, and this is indeed how God works. And he says this. It's just hard to accept. He turns our world upside down. He says, no, I don't go to the connected. I go to the disconnected. I don't go to the powerful. I go to the weak. And I don't go to the rich. I go to the poor. I don't go to those at the center of everything. I go to those who are on the periphery. And those are the ones that I lift up. And the others are humbled and brought low and need to come. And it's God's ways are not our ways. So I think we can see in so many ways that Jesus came as a commoner. And yes, this king theme is there. He is the messianic promised king. And yes, the priest, this ancient promise that God was going to offer himself, a priest who's going to give himself as a sacrifice, and now lives to make intercession. The priest themes are there, and they're rich. and the prophet themes that God promised to Moses long ago, that he was going to send a prophet just like him who is going to reveal all things, and that is finds all those three chords find their fulfillment in Christ. That's all true, and yet we would miss the Christmas story completely if we missed this the commonness of it, because look indeed how he was born into a stable. And I've talked about this in other occasions, so I won't linger too long here, but isn't this a fairly common way to be born, in a place, in an occasion, under circumstances that none of us would choose? When you look at how the poor are born today, this is how the poorest of the poor are born. And not any kind of medical attention the way we would want, and not even a midwife present. No one really to help. Just this couple on their own, needing to do the best they can in a barn, and if so to speak. And it's just very common, isn't it? It's not. It's so far from the palace, you can't see a palace from there, and yet he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who humbled himself to this very state. Well, let's take some time to look at to our story. I think for us, and I hope you can do this, you can kind of look, and I hope this is the kind of sermon where you can, maybe it invites you to ponder and reflect that God often works in common ways. And you think of this in just in the most important things. You know, if you've ever fallen in love, you can ask, oh, how did that happen? You know, for some, they just say love at first sight, and the first time they knew, and it was like a lightning bolt or whatever. But for many, it wasn't that way. It can be gradual. It can be these sorts of common things, but you start to realize that that something extraordinary is happening. And in so many ways, you can, I think, look at your life and say that God works in common ways, and that these are things that just happen. They don't come with a parade. They don't come with fanfare, but they do happen, and they can be absolutely life changing. I think you can see this when people are able to share their story, and I love being able to do this. When you hear people share how they came to faith, or just what their faith journey has been like, I'm struck with how many times there's a turning point moment that didn't look like anything special in the moment. I was in a group of pastors. Then we were just kind of working on this common theme of the bless practices, and wanting to see that. And we just started with people sharing how they came to faith. And this one gentleman was from South Africa, and they were going to do an evangelism, and his this was during still with apartheid, and so this white church kind of crossed that line, and they wanted to do a service in his neighborhood, and so they just asked his mom, "Can we use your home as a place to host this meeting?" And she agreed, and they heard the gospel, and she gave her life to Christ and started following Jesus, and then he did it, and their relatives did, and it was so neat just to hear. It was just such a common thing. It was like, "Can we use your house? We want to have a meeting." And she said, "Sure." And that God used that regular, everyday sort of interaction to do something incredible, and that God works in ways, I think, as we look at our story, that are easy to miss. Isn't it fascinating that sometimes you can only see some of these things really clearly looking backwards? In the moment, you miss it. And it's only later that you can see the breadcrumbs. And this is one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like, and I don't know if you've had this experience where once you see it, then you are kind of like almost like slap your head, like, how did I miss that? How is it even possible that I missed that? Look at what God was doing. Look at how He orchestrated these events. Look at how He brought these people into my life. Look at these divine appointments, and that I was there and this happened, and then I went there and then that happened. And over time, you can just kind of see, like, God has been at work. He has done good things. And but you, in the moment, you didn't notice that. Now, it seems like maybe there's a spiritual gift, and I'll just confess, I don't understand this. I ponder on this too sometimes. Is this a perspective thing, or is this a gift thing? I think some people do have a gift that just seem to be unusually aware of what God is doing. And I think normally folks that are like that have very good prayer life too. But just they seem to have a connectedness, just like Jesus did, of like constantly doing what the Father is doing. My Father is at work, and I have to join Him in it. And for some, they just are like that. They can just connect it. For others, you can just see it more after the fact. But I think when we look at our story, there's a piece here I really want to draw out, and I hope that you can see it, that we allow our expectations to dictate how we think God should work. And I think we all do this. And it just happens where, I think you'd say, well, is that really true? I would ask the question, have you ever been disappointed with God? Have you ever sensed some frustration? Most people are going to answer yes to that question. And I think if you've had disappointment, then you've had some expectations that weren't met. I think that's how disappointment happens. It's unlikely to occur any other way. So many of our expectations are unexpressed. And many times we ourselves don't even know where they came from. Sometimes we can have very detailed scripts about what's supposed to happen. I don't know if you ever bumped into people like this or interact where they have very detailed, this is what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to come, they're supposed to show up, they're supposed to say this, they're supposed to do this, and this is all how it's supposed to go. I think you can just kind of take as like a mathematical fact. The more scripted that is, the more detailed it is, the more things that have to happen just such and such a way, the more likely it is that they're going to be disappointed, because someone's not going to read off their cue card, because someone's going to forget their lines, and something's going to happen that isn't quite the way they all decided this has to go. And so when people do that, they're almost always disappointed. They can be kind of habitually disappointed because they have such detailed ways. And this is indeed how so many people interact with God, that He's supposed to show up, and this is what He's supposed to do, and this is this thing He's supposed to say, and this is the gifts He's supposed to give, and this is when He's supposed to give them, and these are the prayers He's supposed to answer in these ways at this time. And if God doesn't do that, if God doesn't read off the cue card we gave Him, if He doesn't have the same gifts on the same schedule, the same way, at the right time, then we're disappointed. He didn't do what He was supposed to do. And yet, when we say all of that out loud, it doesn't sound good, does it? And it's like, wait a minute, who's God here? Have we put God in a box with our expectations and desires? And where have those things come from anyway? But I think much like this story long ago, I think people miss Jesus. Isn't that incredible? You look at, so how many people in Bethlehem actually knew that anything happened? I mean, can you just consider that for a moment? They're at the turning point of history. When you think of, I think it's kind of funny, you look at that, before it used to be BC and AD, and before Christ and after the year of our Lord in Latin, and then people just said, well, they got grumpy about that, and we're like, well, we're not Christians, so we're not going to use that. So then now we have the Common Era, before the Common Era, after the Common Era, and you're like, well, what actually demarks the Common Era? And it's still the birth of Christ. So it's like, okay. I'm not sure that actually changed it that much. You're still actually implicitly acknowledging that the birth of Christ is the turning point of history. So what if you were there at the turning point of history, whether you call it before Christ or before the Common Era? It's still demarking Christ's birth, and you have front row seat, and they didn't see it. Why? Because they were grumpy about a census, because they were busy doing their own things and worrying about political questions like government overreach and heavy-handed taxes, and the government demanding things of them that they don't want to do, and things we probably think about today. And they didn't see it. They're so grumpy about government overreach that they missed Jesus. You're like, how is that even possible? Well, doesn't it happen today? Well, let's spend some time thinking about how we might apply this. So we've looked at how God shows up in common ways. I'm just going to ask, I feel like I need to do this myself, so I want to just invite you to join me. I think we might have some repentance to do here. Just repenting of deciding how God needs to do what God's going to do. I think we need to identify some of these expectations, and we can say them out loud or write them down. I think we need to confess it as prideful presumption. Who are we, after all? You can say that. Who am I? Who am I that I should tell God how God needs to do what he's going to do, when he needs to do it, how and when? I remember in college, I went to a university, secular university, but I took this one class, Bible as Literature, from an atheist, of all things. And so it was kind of interesting getting this atheist professor's take on the Bible as literature. And we were doing Job, and some student was griping about how slow she was grading the papers, and we were just doing Job. And she went into this rant of, where were you when the dean gave me 3 extra classes? Where were you when the foundations of my schedule were formed? Where were you when, and she just went into this long Job rant. It was very well done in a Job theme. And the person's just like, okay, got it. So you're not going to give us our papers back anytime soon. But we can certainly think of that. Like, who are we? Where were we when God was doing all these things? And who are we that we should tell God what to do? And these expectations that we have, where do they come from? And are we basically acting like we're God and he's our follower? And we're writing a lot of scripts and handing them to him. But what if it's more like, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, that I would, God, as he says through the prophetic voice, that I am doing a thing that would shock you, that nobody would believe if I told them that I'm doing new things. Behold, can you not see it? And that my ways are not your ways. They're above your ways. And what if God wanted to do something that we could not conceive of, and that we have so reduced what God is going to do by limiting it to the capacity we have to imagine it, and that what if our appetites and desires and expectations were the bottleneck that God was facing, and that he wanted to let us just repent and just say, I don't know what God might do, something so beyond, so transcending anything I could come up with. And isn't that what he did in Christmas? Isn't what God does so much better than anything we would have written and done? And I think I want to ask you, rather than ignoring God's common work, let's start to develop the skills and the pattern to looking for how he's at work in common ways. I was interacting with this Christian leader. We were doing kind of a coaching practice thing, and he asked me this question, and I just realized I had not done a good job of this. He invited me to really do this application point, to really look at how God was at work. And why do we discount how God works in common ways? Like, why does that matter less? What could we agree that if God is doing it, it's important by definition? If God sees fit to do something, then it's important. And this distinction of common or uncommon, or those distinctions aren't that helpful. And so let's just lay those down and just say, Lord, I think I need to do this. I want to invite you to do it with me. To just say, Lord, I have decided how things need to happen. I have missed the common things you are doing. And if you want to do this in my life, in my family's life, in our church, in this community, in our nation, if you want to do something, it matters. Because I assume you're right and it needs doing. And whether it's common or not common, I think we need to realign our expectations and just hold up with open hands and just say, Lord, you know what needs doing around here. Let your will be done. We need to come back to the Lord's Prayer and just say, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And start with me. Start with my heart. Have your way in my heart and the expectations I have about how you need to do this and that sort of thing. Then I just need to let you have your way. I think we need to make sure we're not missing Christ this Christmas, that we need to prioritize him. And I want to encourage you to do this in practical ways. I'm going to ask you just to do a very practical thing. Take 5 minutes this week sometime. Just take 5 weeks. You can get on a timer, you can set it for 5 minutes, hit start, and just reflect on how you see God moving in your life. How has God been moving? I love that Blackaby principle he draws us in. See what God is doing and join him in it. So what is God doing in you, and how can you join him in it? And just take that practical step. What's one thing you can do? What's one way you can join him? I think when I did this, when that leader asked me that question, it was joyful for me just to say, yeah, that is happening. I think God is doing that. And it was something that made me thankful. It was something that made me joyful. And I think it can shift our perspective, because we can so easily get fixated on COVID and other things that just draw our attention away, and we get so focused on that that we can stop and just say, what is God doing? And am I paying as much attention to what God is doing in my life and in my world as I am to what the enemy is doing? And if God's doing something, isn't that important? I want to invite you just to imagine could you imagine if someone found Jesus this Christmas, who, just like the story so long ago, that there was all the hustle and the bustle and they're the turning point of redemptive history, and so many people missed it because they weren't looking for God to show up in a stable into a manger. People could have, shepherds didn't, and some commoners didn't, but what if someone this Christmas had the love of God just run them over and they found Jesus? Oh, that would be amazing. Could you imagine what would happen if some good Christians who love Jesus let God out of their box and just said, "Oh my goodness, God, what am I doing? Who am I that I should put you in a box? Who am I that I should write scripts and hand them to you, the God of all the universe, the one who holds the cosmos together by the power of his word, who has prophecies that he spoken centuries ago and come to fruition? Who, why am I God's speechwriter? And let him do the speaking, and I will come behind. Could you imagine what would happen if just literally, let's just say, what if 1 million Christians started out this new year and just let God out of the box and just said, I fire myself and I promote God to the position he should be in, and he's going to call the shots, and he's going to write the scripts, and he's going to do this, and I'm going to follow, and I'm going to look at how he's at work, and I'm going to confess my prideful presumption. I'm going to humble myself before a sovereign and mighty God and let him be who he is, and I will be who I am. Could you imagine what it would look like to see God's common movements, and just that there's so many things we're missing, and like the shepherds, that our eyes could be opened and we could see the glory of what God is doing. Could you imagine what it would look like if this year, if we just started seeing God at work in common ways, in ways that maybe don't make an incredible story, but are life-changing nevertheless? Could you imagine what it would look like if we just saw God at work in our lives, in our families, in our church, in our community, and in this nation in ways that he's already been doing, but we've been missing it because we were looking for him to be working in a way that he wasn't. But when we look for him to be working in common ways, we start to see it. There it is. God is working in common ways. Don't miss it. Well, I pray that God will keep you safe. For those that are sick, we continue to pray that you will be well, and we are going to be communicating with you what worship will look like this coming week. Go in his peace.